At Fieldstone, we believe that all leadership happens through relationship, and that is especially true in fundraising. And so today you're going to hear some great wisdom from Kathy. Some of it, as wisdom is, will not be mind-blowing and mind-altering. It will be reminders to get back to the things that really matter the most. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you to Kathy Druquer Duff. I was trying to think how long I've known Kathy. I don't know. I could say 30 years.
99. First meeting was in 1999.
Okay, so she's keeping track. A long time ago, and that was when I was doing grant making for the Fieldstone Foundation, and I met Kathy, and we became fast friends and continued to work together. And a number of years ago, she went out on her own to establish KDB Philanthropy, and she works across the globe supporting fundraising professionals and teams. And she is one of the best at what she does. And I'm grateful to call her my professional colleague, and I'm grateful to call her my friend, and I'm grateful to introduce her to you today to share her thoughts on fundraising as we move forward from today. So with that, I will, let me say a couple other things. I'm sorry. You are all muted, and that's on purpose, and we can't see you. Two things. We will stop intermittently throughout this presentation for questions. So on the bottom of your screen, a bar should pop up, and there's a little tab that says Q&A. If you have a question for Kathy or the group, or for me or for Mary, please write your question there. And then right to the right of that, you'll see a chat button. And if there's anything else you need, there's a resource you didn't get, or you want to share a resource as we're chatting, please put it in that chat box, and Mary will be keeping track of all of those things. So there you go. All right, Kathy, it's all yours.
All right, Janine, thank you. Welcome, and it really is delightful. I got to see the participant list yesterday and just scrolled through it again. See so many wonderful friends, colleagues, peers, folks that we've worked together over the years. And what Janine said is so true. It is absolutely about relationships. And so what you're going to hear a lot about this morning is we're going to focus on those relationships and what is happening. But I really appreciate, I think that especially during uncertain times, making a commitment to each other, making a commitment to professional development, making a commitment to learning is really important. So I applaud you for being on the phone this morning. I applaud Janine and Mary for putting this opportunity together. I think they may have shared it will be recorded, so folks will have access to it after, which is also, I think, important. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Hopefully everyone's got a copy of the PowerPoint. I know Mary sent that out this morning. Thank you for that. But what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what are the tips for working remotely. Some of us have been doing this for a long time. Some of us, this is brand spanking new, and it changes. I work remotely a lot, but it's usually in my house, doing coaching calls, walking the floors, and now I've got 3 additional folks in the house, and you may even see 1 or 2 of them walk by in the webinar this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at, why now? Why is there truly an opportunity to pivot? What does it mean to have an opportunity mindset? We're going to talk a little bit about virtual engagement and why that is going to become increasingly important. And then we'll finish with some discussion around portfolio. For those of you who have been on the line with me before or have been to any of my discussions, I love to start with a reflection. And candidly, I found 2 that I loved. And step through new doors. There is no question that the way that we were doing our business yesterday, 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago has completely changed. And so all of us, I'm going to ask, how do you put yourself into the discomfort zone? How do you walk through these new doors? And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the discussion this morning. And it is meant to be a discussion. These slides are, I think they're are different connectivity points that we're going to want to talk about, but where this really will become real, Janine mentioned the Q&A. Please put things in there as we go through because we want this to be a dialogue. Opportunities are like sunrises. If you wait too long, you miss them. And that's exactly what's going to happen here, and you're going to hear a little bit this morning about why I feel that way. What do we know, and what do we, this situation clearly is something that none of us in our lifetime have experienced. But we have experienced hard times in fundraising before. We have experienced difficult times in relationship building. And so a couple of things I want to just remind us, for those of us that lived through 9/11 as fundraisers, for those of us who lived through the recession in 08 and 09, it is really important to remember the lessons we learned there. And if you didn't live through that, I'm going to share them. What was most important is how were we connecting with people. When we talked to donors after that period of time, they really highlighted those of us that did a good job in honoring the relationships that we had built or honoring the relationships that we were building. Those were the ones that tended to do the best coming out of that. So if there's any takeaway, and Janine mentioned this in the intro, the importance of relationships, you're going to hear that throughout the conversation this morning. Embrace those relationships. Expand those relationships. And we're going to give a few tips, I think, that will help with that. We also learned from both 9/11 and the recession that those donors who did not feel respected, that did not feel honored, that perhaps felt that they were only as good as their last check, they moved on. But the important thing to remember is those donors we lost, they were still donors, but they were now donors to other organizations. And so we have to recognize that we have a great responsibility in how are we stewarding these folks, how are we creating donor experiences, and again, we're going to give some tips for that. Where organizations truly respected where people were, and in some cases that was they came back in 6 weeks. In some cases, it's 6 months. In some cases, it was 6 years. But if you truly respect where that relationship is and you continue that relationship, whether someone is in that point where they can make a gift today or tomorrow, we heard repeatedly from those folks who felt the relationship was honored that they not only came back, but a lot of times they came back and increased giving. The other thing that happens, and this one makes me a little sad, but I think it's a reality, is that we are all right now having to face what happens if the virus enters my house? What happens if I get the virus? I'm someone that is in a high-risk population, and so I'm having to take extra care. And I think people are wondering, what does this mean for us? And so we will see legacy giving going up. I think there's some sensitivity to how we talk about it, but I think it is important that that was something that we absolutely came out of both 9/11 and the recession. I think we'll see it even more because this is a healthcare issue, that people are going to be having conversations at home about what is important, what do they want their legacy to be, what do they want to be remembered for, and so I think there is some opportunities there as well. So what does it mean, some of you again, what does it mean to work from home? There's a lot of articles out there. All you have to do is get on LinkedIn right now, and every single day there are some really, really good postings, and so I would encourage you to read articles and look for things. But I know for me, on the days where I get up and I don't stay in my pajamas, I actually am much more productive. And so try to keep your routine the same. Take a walk either first thing in the morning. I know for me, I do a fair amount of coaching calls or conference calls, and so I'm walking during those, whether I'm walking in my house or I'm walking outside. Unfortunately, our neighborhood park is now closed, but certainly have the opportunity to walk on the street, but get that area. Get whatever it is for you to get your head in the right place, and make sure you've got structure. I've really been talking to a lot of my clients about this whole new thing with Zoom and technology. For a lot of us, is it can be a wonderful addition to the day, but can also be a distraction. So for our leaders on the phone, is it possible that we say that we're going to do our meetings in the morning, and then the afternoon is your productivity time, whether you're working on portfolio, whether you're doing your outreach calls. I think that we do much, much better when we have time blocks. Do you have dedicated workspace? If you saw right now my table, I have an area, everyone in our house has that space. What is your one big rock? Our to-do lists are never going to shrink. And so what is the one big thing that each day can you feel a sense of accomplishment because you moved one big rock forward? Are we reaching out to friends? Are we reaching out to coworkers? I'm seeing a lot of teams that are doing their 15-minute early morning huddle because it makes you feel like that you're in the workday even though you're in a different space. Come up with your routine. We're going to talk a little bit about calendar blocking a little bit later in this. Internet surfing, stop. Anything that you can do to get that off your calendar and just don't do it. Make sure that you're taking some breaks, create me time during the day, and then quit. Because I think that it's really easy right now to keep just getting on and doing things. So the more that you can do to build that structure, I applaud. So let's get into then how does this apply to us as fundraisers? Some of you have heard me talk about 2 touches. Right now, a lot of the people that I work with, I don't have their home addresses and they're not working from their office. And so I don't have the ability to start my day with 2 touches to clients as much. So I'm either looking for emails or I'm doing handwritten note cards to friends and family. But the idea of 2 touches is that you start your day writing 2 note cards. And when we think about fundraising, we have our active. Active is when we're doing those meetings and we're moving those relationships forward. Then we have passive. And the passive is when we do the follow-up. That's when if I've talked to someone about a program that they're particularly interested in, and now I've got a blog I can send them or an article, anything that will relate to the donor strategy that I'm trying to move forward, that is part of that, what I call passive. So you've got your active and your passive. Being able to start your day with 2 touches, and in my office, I've got right here, I've got my stack of note cards, and so I can come downstairs in the morning and I write that. The other thing that I love about 2 touches is that you usually then, you don't know all these addresses by heart, you're going to have to go into your donor database. And so by doing 2 touches first thing, writing an email or writing a note card is going to require you then to go into your database and pull that person's information out. The other thing is get you focused on the right thing. So right out of the gate, you get to focus on your mission and really be able to look at what is it that you need to be doing. We need to get personal. This is a time where we're not just calling people and looking at how their relationship with us is, but we need to ask people how they are. Everyone is looking at unknowns. You know, if you have young children, then you're trying to juggle childcare while working. If you maybe have folks that are single and they're home by themselves, that's a very different dynamic. Again, I mentioned I've got 2 kids that are now home from college, plus my husband's working from home. And so it's important that we have some of that personal connection to be able to start that call. And then those of you that work with me, you know I'm a huge proponent for calendar blocking. And so what does that look like? Again, if you can start your day with a quick 15-minute, what's on the docket for today? What are the hurdles? How can I support you? What does this look like? Right after that 2 touches, if I know that my first check-in call is at 8 a.m., I can do my 2 touches at 7:30, walk out to the mailbox, drop them in, and then get organized and kind of come in and be able to do that. How much time are you spending on strategy? And I'm not just talking about donor strategy. While I'm a huge believer, you need to have time blocked every single week to be able to look at what time am I dedicating to my donor strategies. I also want you to be blocking an hour or 2 of what do I need to be doing strategically. That may be portfolio time. That may be that I'm writing a case. It may be that I need to think about that big rock and what does that project look like. But I want to see time dedicated to strategy. Then how are we doing in blocking time for our donor calls, our donor email, our outreach, our engagement? Again, if I'm having a Zoom call at 8 and then I only have a block at 9 to 10 and then I'm back on a call at 10 and 11 and then I have a block at noon, I'm not going to be as productive. For most of us, especially when we have as many distractions as we do between news alerts hitting our desk, between family members walking by, someone, our Amazon delivery person, dropping something off on the front doorstep, those distractions are real. And so I really encourage you to have dedicated calendar block times. And again, for me, this is every day. This is not just during a pandemic when I work remotely, but every day. But I think it's important in this conversation to recognize that this structure is going to help that productivity in much better ways. So how am I doing for calendar blocking for donor calls, outreach, engagement? Is there quiet time that you need to be able to write or to do other things? What part of my day is going to be more social, and what part of my day is going to be that dedicated time where I'm going through and I'm mining portfolio or others? So these are a few suggestions. If you have others that you think are helpful to you and productive, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll be able to share them out. But what I'm finding is that for us to be really good in fundraising, rigor is important, but that rigor and structure becomes even much more so in a time of uncertainty. It is a way to be able to make sure that you have a really good focus and that you have a way to make sure that each and every day you're being meaningful. I am talking to some clients that are saying, Kathy, I'm struggling a little bit. I get up in the morning and I kind of get into my groove, and then I get distracted by this news, or I get distracted by something that's going on in my home. That's okay. What do you do to get back into that rigor? And part of having that calendar block and being able to associate that hopefully will help you. So how are we going to use this time of uncertainty and build it as an opportunity? I'm pretty sure that for everyone on the phone this morning, your mission is critical. In fact, your mission may be even more critical, because one of the things that the virus is doing is it is creating a spotlight on a whole other area that we didn't even know was going to be, quote unquote, our competition. And so recognizing that there is so much attention to that as this starts to settle down, and it will, I don't have the crystal ball to tell you when, but it really is important to recognize that our mission is critical. Being able to talk about our mission is so important. One of the things, going back again, what have we learned over the last 100 years of philanthropy? Philanthropy is resilient. It does come back. Now, we may have some organizations that won't make it through. I believe you won't make it through because we're not able to pivot. And so part of the dialogue this morning is being able to recognize that we are going to absolutely have to pivot. Our needs following the virus are very real. And so I work with a lot of universities, and one of the things I've been saying in that population is that we have students that are being displaced. We have students who don't know if they're going to be coming back. When I make that call to check in and they ask how we're doing, I need to be able to talk about in a very real way how this is impacting our campuses. So I want each of you, and there'll be a slide coming up on this, is to think about what is our opportunity. So I'll spend a little bit more time on that. I have always said that philanthropy is the great enhancer. I recognize that a lot of times we start the dialogue about philanthropy, about need, but we also know that our donors don't give to need on a repetitive basis. They will give to need once or twice. Sometimes that's how they're introduced to our organization. Right now, we see a lot of healthcare organizations that are getting that introduction because of the virus. And there's people that are making investments in research. They're making investments in ventilators. They're making investments in 3D printing so that we can have additional masks. But I guarantee you that the organizations that are using philanthropy in this way as an introduction to their organization will make sure that they continue those relationships and those dialogues, because philanthropy is an enhancer. So it is enhancing the situation. It may be coming out of need right now, but that will change. And the most important, I want everyone, if you've got a highlighter or a pen, I need you to circle the fifth bullet, and that is do not make up stories in our head. I started my day this morning. I've already had 3 coaching calls, and what I'm hearing from people is, well, they don't want to hear from me, or it's not the right time, or they're having to go through an adjustment, or they've lost money from their portfolio. I'm going to give some examples in a minute of how we're going to get those stories out of our head. But if any time you're thinking, I can't call this person, I want you to know that that's most likely because of the story in your head and not the story in our donors and our prospects' heads. So again, we're going to talk about that a little more, but please highlight that, circle it. I want you to go back and recognize that in most cases, that there's stories that we are making up in our head, because those are easier sometimes than having the conversation with our donors. So one of the things that I believe is that often in our careers and often in the work that we do, we have an opportunity to pivot. This is one that we didn't ask for, but the opportunity is real. And so I am going to encourage that each and every one of you to think about, how does what's happening in society today and in our world, how does it give you an opportunity to relook, to reassess, or reboot programs? Okay, and then again, there's going to be a slide that comes up, and the next slide we'll talk about this a little bit more. I think it's really important that while initially a lot of us were told to go home for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, this is not going to be a couple of weeks. This is going to be a much longer and drawn out process. So for those of you who thought you were going back on April 1st, I don't want to be the first to tell you you're not. But I think it's important to recognize that this is probably going to be something. The reality is that we are going to have to learn how to do the entire donor cycle, from qualification through cultivation, solicitation, and closure, we're going to have to be able to do on Zoom. We're going to have to do over the phone. We're going to have to do over email. And so we'll talk about that as well. We have a unique opportunity right now that allows us to focus in new and productive ways. Sometimes disruption is a good thing. And that's what I think we have to realize, that while we are in the discomfort zone, and I want you to be in the discomfort zone a little bit, because that's where we grow, that's how we learn, that's how we move things forward, really to be looking at, what can I do today in my calendar block for outreach? What can I do tomorrow that will actually strengthen ties with my donors, that will strengthen ties with people in my portfolio, that will strengthen in ways that I didn't think of 3 and 4 weeks ago? One of the key questions that we're going to need to start asking is, how do people want to engage with us? Do they prefer Zoom? The other opportunity I'm going to say is that a lot of our donors, including me, I'm not going to say, Mary, Janine, and I did a walkthrough of this yesterday, because I'm not as proficient as I would like to do a webinar on Zoom. And so it's forcing me to think differently. It's going to force all of you to think differently. Ask me how I want to be engaged. Do I want to do it over the phone? Do I want to do it on Skype? Do I want to do it over email? Do I prefer Zoom? And can I be a resource to you when you say, I'm not really familiar with Zoom? Take 15 minutes to walk a prospect or a donor through how they can do this. They are going to be very grateful. This is a tool that we're all going to need. But asking people how they prefer to engage virtually, I think, is going to be something that is going to be critically important. So again, highlight this one, circle it. This is another where you can think, hey, this is something that I can be asking every person that I'm talking to. So here are the critical questions for reflection. What are we, and I can do this both individually, what am I doing well? Is it that I'm really good at qualifying, but I'm not as good as moving people through the donor cycle? Is that my organization is really good at donor stewardship, and that we're really good at creating experiences, but we are not good in creating meaningful events? So I want you to think about, and this is a great, sit down with your CEO, sit down, for those of you that have larger teams, take this slide and have a conversation. Set up a call for the next day or two and be able to say, hey, what is it that we do well, and how can we do it even better? How does this pause allow us to think differently, and how do we get to expand it? What are we not doing well? I was on the phone with an organization or with a client yesterday in a coaching call, and they said they hate their event and they don't want to reschedule it. And I said, okay, well, what can we learn over the next few weeks that will allow you to take a case to your board to be able to say, this event hasn't been productive, and now that we had to cancel it, we want to look at doing it differently. Maybe we want to move from a large gala to doing smaller salon events. Maybe we want to move away from an event that is incredibly laborious with staff to something that would be less so. So really to be able to think about, what is something that we are not doing well, or that we've done forever, but it's not yielding the type of results that we want. How is this now an opportunity? So again, this slide, I think, when Janine and I were talking last week about how does this change things, to me, this is a great opportunity to sit down with myself and look at what's going well in my business, perhaps what is not. And then when I work with my teams, what is going well and what would we change? And then, are we committed to doing the right things? I had a conversation with someone this morning that was talking about metrics and some of the metrics that were in place, and that how at this organization, they only get credit for face-to-face meetings. And so how is she going to be successful in this next quarter? Doing the right thing is expanding that metric to recognizing, whether she's getting credit or not, that she needs to take the time to have phone conversations, that she needs to take the time to set up email relationships. That is the right thing for our donors, and ultimately it's the right thing for the organization. And I believe that organization will end up changing the metric when they see how productive this individual is in what she is doing over the phone. And so recognizing, that's just one example, but how do we do the right thing for our organizations? How do we do the right thing for our donors? How do we do the right things for us as fundraising professionals? So again, I would take this slide. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and you don't need to do it just once. Please use it as a tool to be able to say, okay, we were hoping this would be over in 2 weeks, and now we're looking at, we're 4 weeks into this, or we're 6 weeks in, or we're 8 weeks, or we're 10 weeks. Still have these conversations about what seems to be working. Are we paying attention to our trends? Are we paying attention to the type of email that people are responding to versus those that are not? So I want to thank Janine because I know that she put the blog that I wrote about what's taking place right now up as a resource. And so these next 3 slides talk a little bit about that. But it's really important that while a lot of things have been canceled, phone conversations have not. So how are you altering your script? How are you altering your phone message? For those of you that have been scared to get on the phone, how can you now recognize that we need to be on the phone? We need to be reaching out. We need to be doing things because these things are not canceled. I already talked about the importance of 2 touches. If you start your day with 2 touches, you're doing 10 touches a week, 40 touches in a month. Think about what that means for those in your portfolio to be hearing from you. I always remind people that when I go out to the mailbox and I have a stack of things, what stands out? A handwritten note card. And that means I'm either going to open it first because I'm excited or I'm going to save it for last because it's something I want to cherish. And so recognize that a handwritten note goes a long, long way. Sending things, whether it's your publication or it's something that you took from another organization, even another nonprofit that supports your work, looking and paying attention to if you are with a library or if you are with a nonprofit association or you're with a food bank, are there things that other organizations across the country are putting out that could be helpful to you? And can you send them along to our donors and to our prospects? We've already spent a lot of time talking about relationships and we'll continue to talk about that. What are the stories that we are getting out on social media? I have a couple clients that I think are doing really well in this space. Keep doing it because as I become more and more isolated, I'm probably spending more time on LinkedIn. I'm spending more time on Instagram. I'm spending more time on some of these different things at night. So to look and think about that. Being able to make sure that you're virtually sharing the things that are important. Listening. As I feel more and more isolated, being listened to is going to be critically important. And I may cover this in a future slide, but I think it's important to recognize that as I feel isolated, or perhaps I have more time, how many, if I asked you all to raise your hands, how many of you every time you call someone are getting a face-to-face meeting before this started? I don't think I would see a hand of all of the participants go up because we have seen a decrease in face-to-face meetings. They are harder and harder to get. So I think we're going to have to recognize that as people are being more responsive to taking phone calls now, this is going to be our new normal. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited that we're going to have an opportunity to do more on the phone. So to be able, listening is not canceled, caring is not canceled. We know we're all here today to do online learning and professional development, writing our donor strategies. One of the best things that you can do is have a written strategy for every major gift person in your portfolio. For every gift that you want to solicit, when we do a written strategy, that allows me to see what is the outcome that I hope to get, and then stepping backwards, what do I need to do to be successful to get to that outcome? When a strategy is only in my head, that's only half the battle. If I write it down, you have a much higher likelihood of being successful, of getting a yes when you get to that point in the relationship. So take this time if you are not someone who has written down donor strategies. And Janine, I'm happy to share a resource after this webinar that we can put on the site that will allow you to see a template, a couple. I'll send one for an overall donor strategy and then one for an ask, being able to do that. Who are your natural partners? And what I mean by this, for our fundraisers, our CEO is our natural partner. Hopefully the CFO is our natural partner. For those of you that have larger teams, are you talking to prospect research about how we're going to look at trends differently and how we're going to capture this information? If you go back to the bullet I had about how are we going to engage people, I need to capture that in the database. So what does that look like? If I'm fortunate enough to have a stewardship or donor experience partner, what am I doing? So we need to look at what are the best practices and how during this time can we make sure that we're doing that. We're actually going to have a couple of slides, and there's a resource that was sent out as well about what are we doing in how we review and clean up our portfolios. Read blogs every day. Every day, get up or choose at lunchtime to be able to do that. We talked about calendar blocking. When you do calendar blocking, I encourage that you don't do it for a week, that you do it at 3-month intervals. So go ahead and block for 3 months and then be able to look what works well and perhaps what doesn't. But each month I'm going another month out so that I always have 90 days of those calendar blocks in. And I try as much as possible to share with my manager and my team that these are where I've blocked. When I was at UCSD, all of my internal meetings for me were on Tuesdays, and then our staff day was Thursdays, so everyone on our team knew that Thursday was the day that you had to be on campus in the mornings for meetings, but rest of that time was your opportunity to build your own blocks in to be able to do something. We've already talked about the importance of your mission, so that hasn't gone away. The impact is going to be more and more important. We want to focus on what the good is, and we want to focus on what philanthropy is going to do for us, and hope will not be canceled. And then you'll see a link to that blog in case you didn't see it on the resource site. It's available, but I think it's important. So this is the meat. This is where I'm spending most of my time with folks, is really looking at how do we get comfortable in being able to do more phone meetings. If this is an area that you were not comfortable before today, spend some time thinking about what would I need to do to get comfortable. One of the best things that you can do, even virtually, is to do role playing with your colleagues. And if you are a team of one, then ask Janine, who's another partner? Who's someone that is in the space that might have a similar approach or a completely different approach? But I want the opportunity to do some role playing. And role playing means that I might share my script. I know Ellie's on the phone. Ellie's someone I work with, so I may share my script with Ellie. And then I also know Jay's on the phone, and I may say, hey, Jay, can I have Ellie join us? The three of us get on a call, and let's all share our scripts and what it is that we're saying, and have each other talk about, hey, what do I like about this script, and what is it that I might enhance? I was on a call a couple of days ago with someone, and they were sharing an email that they were sending out in a hope to get meetings. And what I saw is two exceptional paragraphs. And then the third paragraph went into looking forward to having you soon, and this is a healthcare nonprofit, to come in for our lab tour. And I said, that's totally tone deaf. Right now, either you're going to have to continually reschedule this, or so how do you instead change this language to invite someone to a virtual coffee? What are you doing? And so being able to work with each other. So to set up this role playing, I think, can be very, very helpful to be able to hear, how do you sound? How are we moving forward? So look to each other. For those of you that have bigger teams, can you dedicate some time to talk with each other, to become conversational? Because as what we're seeing is to get to that comfort zone and feel that you are confident picking up that phone will make these conversations enjoyable. I have hit that we know some donors or prospects are going to feel isolated. They may not this week, but as this goes on, how does my message change? If I call someone in week 2, I'm really truly calling to check in on them. And then perhaps I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's a greater likelihood when I get into weeks 4 and week 5 and week 6, these are folks that I've perhaps already had a discussion with. I'm going to need to think about what that messaging is. So we know that people are going to have more time for conversations, because that's just the natural when you're home for all these hours. How can we be sincere in our approach and still move those conversations forward? And again, I want you to think about what you would send out to someone right now. What would come across as sincere? What would come across as something that would have a hook in it that you would respond? What I'm finding is that in a lot of these calls, after we've checked in, they're turning it back and they're saying, Kathy, how are things for you? How are things for the organization? That is your opportunity to be able to be truly honest, to say, this is an unprecedented time for our organization. The call I'm making today really was to check in on you, but since you've asked, I would love to tell you about some of the things that our organization, we are still doing. These are things that remotely, we are still setting up this. We are making sure that this is still taking place for our service line or for our stakeholders. These are the things that we hope to unroll in the coming months, coming weeks, coming days. So to be able to talk about that is important, but recognize that connection and connectivity is something that is going to be important for donors and is going to be important for prospects. So be prepared. So one of the first things that someone is going to say, most likely, is how is this pandemic or how is this situation impacting this organization? Be ready to be able to talk about that. Knowing that for some of us, we're not going to return to normal, what do we anticipate our greatest opportunities for our organization are going to be? How do we talk about them in a way that is conversational? How is our institution going to support that new normal? And again, these are questions, this is another great slide to take and talk about for those of you who have teams, or to sit down with your CEO and ask them what is their vision. If someone was to ask me this, or once you've gone through some of these calls, to be able to say, these are the initial questions I'm getting. How do you want me to represent the organization best? How do you want me to represent this mission? How do you want me to support this particular area of our organization in a meaningful way? What are your pride points? What are the things that you as an organization are most proud of? And that can be within what is taking place today. And what are you most proud of before all of this started? And what are you most proud of after? Being able to look at that, build those pride points in. And the reason for that is we know that people give to success. People give to things when they know that they are successful. Be able to talk and role model, how are other people giving to your organization right now? Because we're still closing gifts. There are organizations that are closing gifts right now. They closed gifts yesterday. They closed the gift the day before. Don't assume because of where we are that people are not going to still make gifts. And then how, when we call, because I can't only talk about the need, we always want to put our constituents, our donors, our prospects, how can you make them the hero in what we are doing? How can they step forward in a new and unique way that will truly make a difference for what it is that we are doing? So for our current relationships, if they're a member of our donor family, they have a natural, there's a natural relationship and a natural affinity to what we're doing. So we want to reach out. We want to have a message of care. We want to confirm how do they want, what is the best way to communicate with them currently. And it's okay to say that I'm not calling today to make an ask. I think it's perfectly okay, but you have to be prepared that they may ask you what they can do. And so know that you are calling to check in, and that's current. And then whatever your strategy is. So if I'm close to that ask, I may say that, you know what, if this were a normal time, I would be calling you to set up a meeting so we could sit down and talk about your next gift. Today, I really want to just call and check in because you're someone that's important. You're important to our relationship. You're part of our donor family. Is there a time, though, in the coming weeks, because we probably won't be able to meet, that we could set up a phone meeting to talk about this? Don't shy away, because if they then tell you that they're not in a position to do that, they will. But what I have found is a lot of times people will say things like, Kathy, I am losing money every day in the market. Good news is the market went up this morning, third day in a row. But it's important to say, they may say to me, I don't know when I come out of this what my portfolio, my financial portfolio is going to look like. So I do want to make a gift because it's important to me. It was important to me before, and I may not have the money, so I want to do it. I've had someone else who told me in the recession of 2008, 2009, they said, Kathy, we've lost a lot of money, but I know there's other people that have lost more. So I appreciate you coming to talk about the gift of so-and-so, and actually we're going to double it because we know there's others that will not be in a position to do that. And so our donors will surprise us. Our donors, when they care about the work we do, they will absolutely surprise us. And so this came from someone who responded to my blog. Today I set up an online calendar for 30-minute virtual coffees. She got 5 meetings in the first 48 hours after doing an outreach. So I'm going to tell you that this is something that is working. Being able to invite people for it is important. So then a lot of you are asking, okay, that's great. There's people that I already know, but what am I going to do? We're a newer organization, or I'm newer to the organization and I don't have a robust portfolio. Kathy, what's that going to look like for me? Well, I think it's an opportunity to say that our organization recognizes how important it is to continue to build community. And so while I haven't had a conversation with you before, I'm calling because I believe you might care about the work that we're doing. Again, it's not going to be about an ask. It is about how do we introduce ourselves or our organization. And you can say that in my role, I generate private support. In my role, I generate wonderful philanthropy. In my role, I invite people to join us. That's not what today's call is about. I'm calling because you are identified as someone that may care about our mission, and I'd like to learn more about what you know about our work. And then they can tell you, and you can ask some probing questions, and you move it into a meeting. So we're looking in those first meetings for people that I don't yet know, is I want to learn about what their connections are. I want to learn what it could what it could look like to move forward. And it's okay that we may not be able to solicit a gift, but it's the relationships. It is absolutely about the relationships. So do not be shy. Do not believe that because we're in a time of uncertainty that you cannot continue to build new relationships for the great work that you're doing. So we want to be confident. We want to be a conversationalist. So what is your script? And are you practicing? I already talked about that a little bit, how you can do this. What are probing questions? What are the probing questions that you can ask to get to know people better? So we are going to pivot a little bit. We can ask people, how are you working from home in this time? What's working well for you? A main part of my job is outreach. Do you have recommendations for me on ways that I can outreach to others and hear how they would talk about your mission in this time? Being able to do that is important. Reflect, and I'm not hitting the role play button because of that. I already covered that. Reflection. How are you using every call to reflect on, okay, how did that call go? How would I shift it? Because that's a way that you actually get 2 meetings out of 1. So being able to reflect and do that is important. What tools do you need? Is it earbuds that will help you walk? You can see I gesture a lot. My hands are going everywhere because I'm used to doing presentations where my hands are moving and I'm talking. So when I sit, I have to get that same energy by moving. And so what are the tools? Do you need headsets? Can you talk by walking around? Whatever it is, the core concept, and I think one of the biggest things that our industry is going to take away from this time is that we're going to have to be as good on the phone as we are in person. So how do you get comfortable doing that? And that's something, again, I would take the slide, and whether I'm having the conversation with myself, what do I need to do to get more conversational on the phone, or I'm doing it with others in the office, what does that look like? It is really, really important. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to pull down. I know there's some questions, Janine. I will be ready for you to help facilitate. It doesn't look like we have any open questions. Am I missing that? Okay.
No, we don't have any open questions right now. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask?
Go ahead and, please, if there's questions that have come up of anything that we've talked about so far, this would be a great time to go ahead and put those questions in. We are going to continue with some of the slides, and we will come back to questions because I am going to guess that folks,
Kathy,
there are some questions out there. Yeah.
Kathy, we do have a question. It came in on the chat, not the question tab. Would you like me to read it?
I would love it. Thank you.
Can you share the names of the organizations who are communicating effectively using social media? It seems like an especially important engagement point during this time, and I would love to see what others are doing.
Perfect. And so if people have suggestions on that, I think part of it is, I don't want to call groups out, but I happen to have a client who's on the line that I think is posting, I'm going to guess 4 to 5 times a day about different things that they are doing. And what I love about the way that they're doing it is it has, I can quickly open it and I can see how it's related to their overall mission and what I want. And so it's not necessarily fundraising posts, but it's how are we educating people about the importance of our mission? Because then if I'm calling someone, I get to ask them, I'm curious, are you following us on LinkedIn? We have been posting more actively as a way to help educate people about the importance of our mission. Have you seen any of those? And if they say, no, actually, I haven't, then a great opportunity is to say, well, I'm going to send you, here's our site, and please go ahead and join, follow, whatever site it might be. And could I call you next week? I would love to hear your impressions of what we're doing well, and is there anything that we could be doing differently? That's going to drive them to your site. It's going to drive traffic so they're reading, and then you get to ask for their opinion. When I ask what resonated or what did you gravitate towards on the site, as I'm building that relationship, a natural is, I'm really happy to hear that's an area that you gravitated towards because that's an area that we currently are fundraising for. Could you see yourself in a different time perhaps becoming a donor? What would it take for you to become a donor? Is there anything that we could do differently that would motivate you to give to us? But having your social media sites out there And being able to ask people to review them and then ask for their feedback is a great way to find out what did they resonate towards, what do they like, what do they not like. Because a lot of times when we're in a face-to-face meeting, we're taking a collateral. We're taking something to share. That's the other thing is I don't like to walk through that collateral when I'm sitting with you. I like to say at the end of the meeting, I brought something that I would love for you to read. And could I call you next week and get your impressions on it? And so now we're not having the face-to-face meetings, but what are the things that you have in place, whether it's on social media or different tools that you can send and then ask someone to review and say, I would love the opportunity to call you in a few days and hear what you think. And those are easy ways to get quick 15 and 30-minute meetings that will allow you to start understanding more about your donors, that you can then do those written strategies and decide, okay, they said they really care about program A, and then we start thinking about capacity. I would love to move them in the next 3 months, 6 months towards a gift of $10,000 to do such and such. So great question. If there's others that have thoughts, please put it in the chat box and we'll have Mary or Janine share them.
So Kathy, we have 2 other questions. One
Perfect.
is, could you talk more about moving through the entire donor cycle remotely? Often one of our steps is an event or other in-person engagement.
Great question. So when I think of the donor cycle, when I think about qualification, my goal is to try to qualify someone in one meeting. And so what I mean by that is I want to identify, do I believe they have capacity? Some of us have wealth screenings and other tools that will support us. Others don't. And so we have to identify that in that first meeting. And so I want to identify, do they have capacity? And do they have propensity? And so a lot of times now moving that to the phone is going to be asking the types of questions. Again, if I've asked them to look at my social media site, perhaps in my introductory call, then I'm going to look at that first real meeting as meeting 1 when I'm now getting their feedback and asking them questions about do they like our mission? Could they like our mission? What would their liking our mission look like to them? What is important when they think about philanthropic considerations? How do they make considerations? One of the questions I might even say is, during a time of uncertainty, how will you be making your philanthropic decisions? Is this a time, because a lot of people are not going to stop giving. In fact, a lot of people are going to step to the plate and give more because of their need to feel that, have that gratitude and feel good about what they're doing. Then what it means is if you think about what are the next steps that you take, if I'm doing cultivation, can I cultivate someone on the phone? Can I move them towards that ask on the phone? So when I think about the donor cycle, I think of identification, which is how I get the name, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and close. So what would I need to do for each of those stages to feel comfortable to do that on the phone? The most important thing is I need to now think of the phone as not purely my outreach tool, is how I get to someone, or when I send that email is I've used that as my outreach tool. I now need to think of that phone or Zoom or email as a physical meeting. So what does that look like? We still have all the elements that we would have in a face-to-face meeting. The biggest one is, how do I as a fundraiser get conversational and feel comfortable? Because if I was classically trained, most of us on the phone were classically trained, whether you're new or older to the industry, which was that you couldn't secure a major gift without doing a face-to-face meeting. What happens if we're still on the phone in December? What happens if we're still working remotely by the time that 3 months, 6 months from now? Our organizations cannot afford for us to not do our business, which means that how do we move to getting very comfortable that my phone is now Starbucks, that my phone is now sitting in someone's living room? So that's what I mean. If there's additional questions to that, I'm happy to address it. Janine, I think you said there was one more question.
Yeah, and actually we have 2 more, and they're somewhat related about legacy and planned giving. So I'm going to read both of them to you. The first one is, how do you have a conversation around legacy giving at a time like this? I've never been comfortable with this during healthy times, much less right now. The second question says, can you expand on your thoughts around legacy and planned giving at this time? Our organization was in the middle of an expanded marketing push for planned giving, and we don't want to put it on hold, but want to be sensitive when someone may be facing loss in their own lives.
Yeah. So loss is a reality, and loss is a really hard reality. So I'm going to approach these questions from a couple different vantage points. The first one is going to be that I think it's very important to be able to have a dialogue about what does someone want their legacy to be. Okay, I'm not at this point saying, will you make a planned gift? But for donors that have been with us for a long time, okay, so if it's an annual donor that has been with us for a long time, I may say to them, you have been a wonderful, loyal annual supporter. Do you know that you've been giving to our organization for 16 years? And they may say, I had no idea I was giving that long. And be able to say, if I could create a way that your annual gift could go for perpetuity, that you could give to our organization, not just this year, but next year, and even when you're no longer with us, would you be open to having that discussion? So that's one thing. That's one approach. The second is, again, this is for someone who's been more loyal. You've been someone who's been really supportive of our organization. If you were to dream, what would you do for us? If you could dream, and we're not talking about money's not an object, but if you could just dream with me, what would be most important that our organization continues, that our organization does, that our organization starts? You can take it from any of those platforms. And then they tell you what it is, and you say, well, what happens if I could give you a mechanism to do that? Would you be open to having that discussion? So again, and then we start talking about role modeling. And what I like to do in that situation is say, I had a conversation with Peggy, and this is actually a true story. And Peggy was someone who loved the organization, and she would always say to me, I wish I could do more. And I learned through that, the first time they say that to you, that is when someone says, I wish I could do more, that is your opportunity to introduce planned giving, or it's an opportunity to introduce peer screening, or it's an opportunity to introduce a salon event, because those are things that they can do to help move our organization. But the question's about planned giving. So in Peggy's case, when she said, I wish I could do more, I said, Peggy, would you be open to a conversation on how you might? And she was someone that was giving $10,000 a year to the organization. And so I sat down and I walked her through, if she put us in her estate, how she'd be able to do $10,000 forever. And then I asked her, I said, Peggy, I think there's a lot of other people that are like you. Can I tell your story to others? So any other time now I'm having that conversation about dream a little bit, going back to that. And then I can say, can I tell you about Peggy? Peggy's someone that I worked with who, like you, is passionate about the work we're doing. And she also wanted to be able to do more. And so we did this dream. And now she has put us in her estate, and we will get $10,000 a year from an endowment that her estate created. And so being able to role model how you've done something is a beautiful way to bring someone else into that. So the first thing is I'm going to say, based on that question, is I think it is really important that we are comfortable in talking and asking people, what do they want to be remembered for? What do they want their legacy to be? And I can even say, Janine and I are in a conversation, I can say, Janine, I'd love to ask you a question, and I don't want you to think that I'm suggesting that you need to die. But I'm really curious, when you think about what do you want to be remembered for, what would that look like? And if I'm doing it in a conversational way, I'm hoping that Janine's not offended at all, the way that I just phrased that. Because what I'm asking her is, Janine, you have a legacy in our nonprofit community, but what do you really want to be remembered for? What is going to be most important to you? And I think the other thing to recognize is that we have a whole host of donors. I'm the bottom of the baby boomers, and they are starting to think about what their legacy is. In fact, I'm thinking about it a lot more, because anytime you're staring at mortality and you're staring at a really uncertain time, you do think about it. And so I want you all to get conversational on how do you do this in a thoughtful, meaningful, sensitive way. I will also tell you that my rude awakening to being able to have a planned giving conversation. I had someone that I was working with, and she was doing annual gifts at a very nice level, but she had told us at some point she was going to give us her house. And I had a series of conversations with her, and each time we'd go and talk about her current giving, I would ask if she was ready to have a conversation about her house. And she always said, Kathy, I'm not there. So I was having a conversation when I was fortunate enough to have a planned giving director, and she says, Kathy, let me go to the next lunch that you have with her. And so I would bring this person's favorite meal to their home. And so I brought it, and Trish came with us, and she looked across the table, and she said, she happened to have this beautiful Southern drawl, but she said, Harriet, you are going to die. And I thought I was going to die right then and there. I could not believe that she said that. but she goes, and I know that you want more than anything that if you are not here, that your legacy is seen. And so the best thing that we can do is work with you to make sure that this happens. So what do we need to do now to get the house transferred to such and such organization? And she, after, and I had not been able to move it. And she said, Trish, you're right. I have sat on this for too long. Kathy's been really kind. This is exactly the push I needed. And we had the paperwork signed and done the next week. So I was younger in my career. It was a wonderful wake up for me to see that a lot of people are they're fine having the conversation. We just have to be comfortable. So I want you to think about, is it your comfort level that you're worried about bringing this up, or is it theirs? And so how do you get to a place where you can be conversational about what a legacy looks like? If it's someone that's newer to your organization and they're just getting introduced to you, I think part of that is then asking them, how have they made gifts to other organizations? And if there's something lofty that you were discussing with them and they're not sure how they're going to get there, then you can say, in any of your conversations with other organizations, have they ever introduced planned giving? And a lot of people are going to say, no, what is that? And then that gives you the opportunity to say that working with our organization, we work with donors that want us to, do they want to think about our sustainability for the long haul? Or there's a program that they care about and they want to make sure that we can endow it in perpetuity. And this is what it looks like. And then you go ahead and you do that role modeling language. So that was a relatively long answer. I'm happy, Janine, if there's a follow-up to that.
Yeah, again, I keep saying this, there's two more questions, and I'm going to skip one because it's a little bit on a different topic. This one is more in alignment with what you've been talking about. It. And the question says, I'm concerned that we need to actively plan for both staff and donor mortality, as it seems statistically this is a grim reality. Should we be working on contingencies, and what would that look like?
Wow. Okay. I'm not sure that I am equipped to answer that. What I am going to say is that I work with a lot of healthcare organizations where mortality is a reality. And I have one team in particular where we have lost staff, and we obviously have lost donors to cancer. And with that, it allows me, in not a manipulative way, and hopefully that if you don't know me, my approach is very relationship based. I am not a transactional fundraiser, and so I think it's important to be able to say that, is that we know firsthand how this virus is impacted. And I may share that story. I may say that we have a donor who's been with our organization for a short time, maybe 6 months, or maybe someone who's been involved, and we lost them. And one of the things that I learned, and then have a sincere takeaway of what you learned from that person. And so through that, I know that our reality and what our mission is more important than ever. It's not an easy one. I don't want us to plan for it. I want you to be able to move into crisis management if it happens. And maybe that's my Pollyanna. But I think the reality is, yes, that we are going to have organizations where this happens. How do we take a staff member who was so committed to our mission and carry their legacy forward? Same thing with the donor. The best way we can do it is to honor them and honor the role they played in our institution. So as I process that question, I may come back and give some additional thoughts. And again, I'm really open if people have had that situation and they want to do it, happy to do that. Janine, my thought is that we should probably now keep going through some of these slides and then come back. Are you comfortable? Okay, yep. Perfect. So we'll continue. Thank you for really thoughtful questions, and let's continue as we're talking about this to be able to do that. For whatever reason, my screen, there we go. I have just a moment of freezing there, but it's coming back. So cancellations. There's a lot of things that we are having to cancel. The first thing I'm going to say is for anyone on the phone who has an event, whether it was a salon event, whether it was a tour of a lab, whether it was your gala, what are you going to do on the day of that event? You have a whole host of people that had that date on your calendar. have a communications plan, whether you're going to send a simple video, whether you want to do an impact statement, whether you want to send something that we're missing you. We were supposed to be gathered today to celebrate our organization and the mission, and then maybe have a line or two about what you're doing and invite people to a virtual coffee, or to invite people to that we are doing table conversations. So we're inviting tables that would have sat together in the next week. Let's get together and let's talk about why this organization can continue to work with you in the future. However you want to set it up, I think it's really important that we don't let those dates just pass by, that you have a communications plan. It does not have to be elaborate. It can be simple. We want to remind people why our work is still important. If we had the event, what was your follow-up strategy going to be, and how do you implement it now? Okay, so Saturday night was supposed to be our, let's say, the Humane Society ball, and now we're not having that. What are we doing that next week? I want you to still deploy the same follow-up strategies. The messaging might be a little bit different, but I want you to deploy them. Okay, so really be able to look at how do we tie this cancellation to individual strategies and be able to move these things forward. And then I mentioned this early on, but is this something that maybe this event shouldn't happen in the future, or we need to reframe it? Be thinking about and have some conversations about, if we got to blow this up, what would it look like? If this was no longer on our calendar, how would we reuse that time? Would it be more phone conversations? Would it be more small group discussions? Would it be salon events? And again, I think we can do salon events virtually. I haven't personally done one yet, but I'm planning, I certainly am coaching a couple of clients on how to do that. So please look at your cancellations as opportunities and be able to move things forward. The other area that I'm seeing a lot of folks focusing on is, okay, maybe I'm not as comfortable. Now, hopefully after today's call, you are going to be more comfortable in being able to call people. But this is also an opportunity to go back and do portfolios. If you're not subscribing to Lisa Greer, I think she's fabulous. Lisa is someone who is a donor who writes blogs for fundraisers. And so go ahead, and after we get off the phone, you might want to Google her, but I credit this. She had one of the best blogs right out of the gate when we were looking at the realities of the virus a couple of weeks ago and what it meant for working remote. And so her suggestions were and don't spend more than 5 minutes, but could you create a mini profile for your prospects that we are now putting into our database that will allow us to have better and more strategic information about them? And so don't focus on, we can go on Zillow and find out how much the home is worth, but could you spend 5 minutes looking for diamonds in the rough and do this for every single person in your portfolio that will allow you to find information that strengthens where you want to go? And again, this ties into the written strategy piece. If you have a written strategy, and I know I want to be able to ask someone for $10,000, what's the information that I don't have yet, and what would a 5-minute Google search, how could I do that? We then sent 2 resources, and one of them was an Excel spreadsheet. It had 25 different, each one of those numbers represent a person. A blind portfolio is you run your portfolio with no names attached. And this is especially important for some of you who've been in your role for a long time. We get to know people, and sometimes the people we spend the most time with are the people that we're going to see the least amount of return. And I don't want to be crass about that, but there is a reality that we need to focus on where our greatest opportunities are. So I encourage you all to run your portfolio with no names. And what you'll see on the resource that we sent, it has their first gift, it's got their total giving. For those of you who have affinity scores, an affinity score is from 1 to 10, and it will indicate based on titles. So if someone's a vice president, they get more points. If someone's been a regular donor to you, if they attend your events in the last 12 months, all of these things will give them a higher affinity score. So if you don't have that, you can still do the exercise, but just know that 10 is the highest, and in the sample that I gave you, 1 is the lowest. But what I do when I do live trainings is I have people do this exercise of a fake portfolio and decide who would be your top. If I were to do this blind, who would I rank my top prospect, my second prospect, my third prospect, my fourth prospect, and am I spending time on them? What I find is that when people do a run of their portfolio blind, there's a lot of people they end up dropping because they'll decide to have a different approach because they recognize this is someone that is not going to be yielding a major gift. This is not someone that they can move forward, but because they've had a long relationship or they don't know how to pivot that relationship, they keep them in the portfolio. So the first one is a sample. If you want, you can do that exercise yourself and kind of come up with what it would be. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is the definition of a top prospect? A top prospect, when you look at that make-believe portfolio, if I asked you who would be your best plan gift, you would have a very different answer if I said I was looking for a younger donor to role model for other young donors. Or if I was looking for someone to be a campaign volunteer versus I was looking to raise a $25,000 gift. So it changes. So one of the most important takeaways of that resource is, do you know a definition of your top prospect? What is that? And are you talking about it with others so that we all know what we're looking for? Then the second piece that we sent is for you then to actually go through your own portfolio, and these are considerations. So again, if you're someone that is having some additional time and you haven't been able to be as strategic about your portfolio, I think the blind portfolio exercise, both how you run it blind, and then you've got the write-up, this is an opportunity for you to be able to move it forward and look at ways that you can strengthen your portfolio. So the other thing, one of the first questions that I had with someone that I coached a couple weeks ago was, Kathy, I'm a little uncomfortable calling people because I don't want it to look like I'm taking advantage. So I want you to know that you're not. Relationships trump all. This is about building for your institution's future. And so if someone says to you, I can't believe you're calling me in this time, you need to know, what is your response going to be? My response is going to be, I'm calling you for two reasons. I'm calling because I care about you as a stakeholder, whether they're a current donor or a stakeholder that could be. And number two, we are calling people and getting information about our mission right now. And we would love to know what you think. Make sure that your messages are not tone deaf. And I'm almost positive this organization is not on the phone. I got an email from an organization that I have supported in the past. And the tagline was rest assured. And then it had one paragraph about what's happening in our community with the virus, and then it went into an ask. I am not rest assured right now. I'm not feeling that way at all. There is no calm that is going on. I'm trying to pretend I'm calm, but there is no calm. And to get an email that is that tone deaf, to me, I was like, I may not support this organization. And I'd gotten an email from them a couple of days before, and I thought, this is not the right message. And so we knew that they felt that was a tagline that would get people's attention. The hook needs to be sincere. And so I'll just give that. I think it's really important that when you look at any email that you are sending out, have someone else read it. And are they going to respond in a way that is warm, or is it tone deaf? What does your gut tell you? And this is different than the stories in your head. Okay, so what is your gut telling you about the relationship and where it is? And listen to that, but then build your strategy. Do not do the story in your head. Some of the organizations on the line today do have metrics. Please do not use your metrics to drive the action. The relationship and the compassion should be the driver. And what I mean by that is, I gave the example this morning of someone I talked to, and they were still being told that the only metric that will be considered is face-to-face. The right thing to do is to place the phone call and check in on the people that we care about. And so don't use metrics to drive the action. Use your metrics to remind you that we are in the relationship business, and I want to be reaching out to people because that's important. For those of you, and I've already mentioned this, but I just want to say it again, push your discomfort away. It is really important that you become comfortable in a new way. Find a peer that you can have a call with. Find a peer that you can move things forward. Going to be really important. So I'm going to go into what the takeaways are from today's session, and then we are going to go back and spend the remaining, we've got about 14 minutes left, on any questions that you all have on things that we covered or that you want more clarification on or we didn't cover. So your most important, hopefully, takeaways: build your daily structure and stick to it. Really look at that calendar blocking. So daily structure, we gave some tips for working remote, but every day, whether we're in an office, we're at home, when things go back, what is your daily structure? What is the framework that you have that will ensure that you have the opportunity to be successful? So again, in my mind, those calendar blocks are around outreach, whether that's qualification, that's cultivation, that's solicitation. Am I blocking for meaningful, thoughtful discussions? Am I blocking time for portfolio and database? Am I making sure I start every day with my 2 touches? Whatever your structure is, make sure you have a framework that will support your most important work. This is also an opportunity for us to look at and see what is not the most important work that I have been spending time on, and how do I shift? Making sure that we have the tools to reach out to the right people. Your mission is important. Again, whether you're sharing it on social media, whether you're sharing it mailing, whether you are the collateral, and I'm a big proponent of you, the fundraiser, you are your collateral. How are you able to speak about it conversationally that invites people in, that is not only going to build engagement for current folks, but for future gifts as well? So, and then the very last slide is just if you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, or you'd like to read my blog, we have a monthly newsletter. You can go on my site to do that. Janine, let's go ahead and go back to the questions that we have, and I'm also going to pull them down so I can read them as well.
So the first question is, I work with the elderly. When I'm making my calls, how can I make them feel more at ease during this time? Yeah.
So I think it's important that we recognize that we can be compassionate partners. We are not counselors. And so I think it is important that when we reach out, that check-in for someone that perhaps is a little bit older may look different. And I may ask them, do they have the resources they need? I may be willing to take that time and do a Zoom tutorial and be able to say, I'm going to walk you through this, because a lot of it's going to be what I'm hearing. I happen to have both my mom and my mother-in-law both are they're not just in shelter in place, they're in a community where they're not allowed to leave their homes at all to go outside. And so our check-in calls have been about what are the resources that you need. We can still be that. And again, there's a difference in being able to do it. And I think one of the other things that I can't remember if I covered or not is this is going to shift. The call that we're having right now, the calls that you should be making this week and next week to all of our populations, our check-in, but that is going to shift if we've been there 6 weeks and 8 weeks and 10 weeks. And so I may be asking someone at the 6-week mark, what are they doing to stay focused and stay busy? Can I send them a concept paper? Could I send them a concept paper about something that we had planned to launch before the virus hit or the pandemic hit? And would they be willing to look at it? They can read our cases for support. It's going to be a great way to identify. So back to the question, I know I'm jumping around, but back to the question about how do we do every step in the donor cycle. Hopefully you're seeing a parallel for what I'm talking about right now in this answer to that. I think it's important to be able to ask, can we have a focused discussion on something? And I had a situation before the pandemic. One of my fundraisers that I love working with dearly, he had shared a story where he was meeting with a donor, an older donor, that they were ready. They had gotten to the point where it was going to be a solicitation. And the woman he was sitting with kept talking about what a hot day it was and how she was worried about her tomatoes. And Jason finally said, Mary, would you like to go out and water your tomatoes? Let's go do that together. And so he went out and helped her water the tomatoes, and they came back, and then they had their conversation. He recognized that she was distracted, and with that distraction, he was going to try to move that distraction so they could have the conversation. So recognize that we all are going to have some distractions, and what does that look like? And so again, I might, for any population, when I make that call, is say, right, my call today really is to check in and to see how you are. You're an important part of our family, important part of our donor family. But I would love to set up a time next week where we can have a virtual conversation. I could tell you some of the things that are going on with such and such organization. When we have a scheduled time, the same way that I've recommended that we have framework on our day, when you can provide some framework to anyone, whether it's a younger donor or an older donor, they may have something to look forward to. And they may say, oh my gosh, Kathy, I've been looking forward to this call. I'm so glad that we scheduled it. And so be able to provide people some framework at a time where they may not be having that structure, especially if you're home by yourself, or you may need that structure. I may have younger children. I may have older children. So again, it's how do we provide some sense of normalcy in a time that is not normal, that may become the normal, which is why we have to pivot, why we have to shift, why we have to be able to move into our discomfort zone to create comfort for others.
Okay,
Janine.
Thank you. I work with a very
And Mary,
small...
will you keep the question on the screen? I do better when I can still see it, if you don't mind. Instead of showing that it's answered, that would be helpful.
Yep. I work with a very small organization with no development director and only an executive director with a supportive board of directors. Would you recommend that the first call be a care call to their funders and donors and follow it with an email or phone call with the soft ask? This organization provides mentors to at-risk boys.
Okay. Thank you. And I know we have a lot of folks on the phone that do not have a development director and that the ED has a lot going on. My preference is to do a soft ask on the phone call, or to get permission in a phone call to be able to send a follow-up that will be a soft ask that will talk about some of the things that they can consider, and then can I follow up with them on the phone? That's always the same way that my preference is going to be to do an ask face-to-face. So I think my first, and I'm not sure, the one thing I'm not sure on this question with the supportive board of directors, are any of your board of directors making calls on your behalf? Or is the supportive board of directors a talking point that you can use in the conversation that during this time of extreme difficulty and uncertainty, I feel very fortunate that we have a board of directors that are absolutely standing with me on this mission. And so when I call you today, I'm not only calling on our behalf of the organization, but I'm also calling on behalf of the board, and then go into what that call is. I do think it's just, again, when we talk about the importance of starting with care and compassion, but then being able to move into, we don't have any data out yet, but I think we'll start to see data coming out as some of our organizations that do data and surveys. I think we're going to start to see that it's a fairly high percentage of people. They're going to ask, what do you need, or what does the organization need right now? And so, again, being prepared to answer that. But then that second call really is, if I'm moving that strategy forward and I'm looking to see what that looks like, I want to be able to do that. And so the first call may set up, and I may even say, I've really enjoyed this call with you today, Janine. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that you and your family have what you need. I would love to schedule a call in the next few weeks to spend a little bit more time talking about what we're doing as an organization. Could we set that up? And then I may have the email as a follow-up to here's, 5 different times that we can set up a virtual call. I may even ask the person on that call, what method are you most comfortable with? Is it email? Is it this? Is it that? Because you will have some people that would prefer to talk with you over email, but I absolutely want to push that this connectivity during a time of lack of connectivity is going to be your greatest opportunity to be able to move that forward. So, and thank you. I saw that the answer is that the board of directors are making calls. So one of the things that I would probably do if my board is making calls is I would set up a virtual role play. I would send out kind of some talking points of things that we think are most important to highlight. And when we talk about mentors for at-risk boys, and I think for almost anything for any of you on the call, they're at greater risk today than they were yesterday, and they're going to be at greater risk tomorrow. And so while we recognize the nation is very focused on the pandemic, our role as an organization is to make sure that our boys don't get lost. And so we're calling today, So that is what I would do there. Great question. Thank you.
And I want to add that in terms of information and things coming out is hopefully you've all seen the preliminary results from the survey that the University of San Diego's Nonprofit Institute has put out. It was in the Union Tribune yesterday and followed also by KUSI. We have it on our social media platforms as well, and that gives you some great information in terms of what's happening right now, what nonprofits believe is going to be the reality in 4 weeks and then 8 weeks. So that's a resource for you. And also in terms of employment, Workforce Partnership has put out a very detailed report. There's about a 10-page summary with some critical information. So that's another resource for you as well. Do we have any other questions for Kathy?
Okay, so Janine, I'll let you close it up in a minute. I want to end with a thank you. I have always so firmly believed that the work we do is honorable. The work that we do is just so important to organizations, and it's unfortunate that in a time like this that we're going through this time. But please take such pride in the work that you're doing. It is so important to our communities. It is so important to our neighborhoods. It is so important to what we're doing. And I recognize that the discomfort is hard. And I recognize that some of the concepts we talked about on the phone today are things that are not intuitively going to feel right. But take the time to do it, because the relationships that we have built, that our predecessors have built, and that we are building are going to be so important for today, tomorrow, and our organization's future. So I just want to thank you for the time, Janine. Thank you for having this platform available. And I love living in a community that is so thoughtful and so caring.
Gosh, that's a hard act to follow, Kathy. Thank you so much. I not only with the material, but also your good thoughts and encouragement. I appreciate that, and I know everyone else does as well. And I want to echo Kathy's good thoughts and encouragement. And I want to extend that with an invitation that if there are things that you are coming up against, or challenges or questions that you have, or things that you think would be helpful for you, you're probably not the only one. And the Fieldstone Leadership Network in San Diego exists solely to support nonprofit leaders such as yourself. So please reach out to me. Please reach out to Mary. Let us know if there's things that we could be providing to make your job easier, and we will be happy to explore that and see if we can get some resources or some expertise to you any way that we can. So thank you again for joining us. Hang in there. Know that we appreciate you. Know that we know you're working extremely, extremely hard, and we will be here to support you and to lift you up in whatever way we can. You will get an email from us with some follow-up materials. And again, the video will be available on our website under the Crossroads tab, on our program tab on the website. And so it's there for your use, and feel free to pass that on with others. And you also have the information to contact Kathy if you have other questions and would like to work with her. So with that, I will thank you again for coming. We're very grateful to have been able to spend this time with you, and we will hopefully see you again soon. Thank you, Kathy, so much. I'm very grateful.